Hello coders, I am Jared with Renaissance Coders, and in this video we are continuing with our complete game series in Unity 3D. The game that we are developing in this series is called Cannonball, and so far we have set up our prototyping level, created our model in Blender, and pulled that model into Unity. Now in this video we are going to implement the controller for our cannon, set up a testing version of our Cannonball, and we will set up some initial test firing in our game. Okay, so we are going to spend a lot of time inside of our code editor for this video, but it is definitely going to be worthwhile. So let's go ahead and set up some of our scripts. The first thing we actually need to do is create a folder for our scripts, because if you look down here inside of our assets directory, we don't actually have a folder set up for the scripts yet. So we're going to right click, create a folder, and we can just call this folder scripts. Okay, now let's actually step inside of this scripts folder. And for this video, we're actually going to create two new scripts. So let's right click, create a C# script. And this one can be called our cannon controller. And we're going to create another one. So right click, create C# script. And this one can be called our cannonball. Okay, cool. Now let's actually open up these scripts and get to work. I'm actually going to start with the cannon controller because that script is going to require the most amount of work for this video. And then we will enter into the cannonball script to do some initial setup. Okay, so let's get started. Now, the first thing I actually want to set up inside of our cannon controller is the method we're going to use to actually rotate our cannon. So we're going to set up several variables up top, but the first thing I want to do is actually create a comment here, and this comment will be really useful later on when we add more variables to this script. So we're just going to call this our rotation variables. Actually, let's make it a little more specific and call it our cannon rotation variables. And these variables are going to be specific to how we will actually manipulate the rotation of the cannon. So let's create two new spaces here, and the first thing we're going to need is a public int for our speed. We're going to need a public float for our friction, a public float that we will call our Lerp speed. We're going to need a couple of private variables. The first one will be a float that we will call our x degrees. The next one will be a float that is going to be our y degrees. We are also going to need to use a quaternion here. So we're going to say quaternion from rotation and a quaternion to rotation. And the final variable we will need here is actually a reference to our camera. So we will just say camera. Okay, cool. Now inside of our start function, we only have to do one thing. We're going to have to get a reference to our camera, so we can set our camera is equal to camera.main. Okay, very cool. Now we actually have a little bit of coding that we need to do inside of our update function. And the first thing we're going to do is actually perform a raycast inside of our update function to see if we are clicking on our cannon. So we're going to say raycast hit, just like that. Oop, make sure you do raycast, not raycasts. There we go. And we're going to create a new ray. So we're going to say ray is equal to camera.ScreenPointToRay. And we're going to pass in our input.mouse position here. Very cool. And now we actually want to check to see if our ray is hitting anything. So we want to do an if check here. So we're going to say if physics.raycast. And we need to pass in two variables here. So we're going to say our ray that we created above. And we're going to use out hit here, and hit is actually going to tell us what object we are hitting. And now we want to make sure that we're hitting the correct object. So we want to say if hit.transform.gameobject.tag is equal to cannon, then we want to actually perform another if check. And don't worry if this is moving along a little quickly for you. I'm definitely going to circle back around to explain what this code is actually doing in depth after we get it all written out. But we do want to perform another if check here. So we're going to say if input.get mouse button 0, then we want to actually manipulate a couple of things here. So what we actually want to do here is track our mouse position's movement, and as our mouse position moves, we want to actually rotate our cannon. So the first thing we're going to do is say x degrees minus equals our input.getAxis, and we're just going to pass in mouse x here, or mouse y here. We're going to multiply that by our speed and our friction, and now we can actually copy this line and paste it. We're just going to change x degrees to y degrees, and we're going to change our mouse y to our mouse x here, multiplied by speed and friction. And now what we actually want to do is set up our from rotation and to rotation variables. So we're going to say our from rotation is equal to our current rotation, which is transform.rotation, and we want to get our to rotation. So our to rotation is going to be equal to a Quaternion.Euler. We're going to pass in our x degrees here, our y y degrees, and we're going to pass in 0 for the z. And now what we actually want to do is update our rotation. So we're going to say transform.rotation is equal to a Quaternion.Lerp. Basically what we want to lerp here is, and basically a lerp moves from like 0 to 1 or A to B. So in this instance, we want to lerp from our from rotation to our to rotation over some time. So we're going to pass in our from rotation here, our to rotation as our second parameter, and then for the last parameter we're going to pass in time.delta time multiplied by our lerp speed. So that's why the lerp speed is actually important. So we want to have two different speed variables here. One to control how quickly we can adjust the rotation of the cannon, and the other to adjust how quickly the cannon will actually rotate. Okay, so that should do it for this script here. You know, it's not overly complicated, but we are dealing with several new things here, and if you're new to Unity, a lot of this is going to be really confusing. So let's step through what we're doing. Up top, we're just setting up several variables. The public variables will actually show up inside of our inspector, which allows us to easily manipulate those variables so that we can change the behavior of this script. The private variables are going to be used within this script only. So those are variables that we need to have inside of this script so that we can update this object in particular. Our camera is just a quick reference to our camera so that we can call this ScreenPointToRay. And basically the ScreenPointToRay only cares about the mouse position on the X and the Y. So it doesn't take the Z into account for this. The next thing we're actually doing is creating a raycast, and raycasts are going to be used all the time inside of Unity. You can use them for a multitude of things, and they're really awesome. Basically, this one will just create a ray that goes from our camera to the X and Y coordinates of our mouse. And the out is just what we are actually hitting, or what the raycast is actually hitting. And we want to make sure that our raycast is actually hitting the cannon here, because if we did not perform this check, then this script would not work. The next thing we want to actually do is make sure that we're holding down the left mouse button. So by passing in 0 to get mouse button, we're checking to make sure that the left mouse button is down, so you can click and drag and actually rotate the cannon. Okay, so the next thing we're actually doing here is setting up our X degrees and Y degrees. And as you can see here, we're setting up the X degrees on the mouse's Y axis, multiplied by our speed and our friction. And these variables will basically control how quickly we can update the rotation. So it's pretty simple, and actually I just noticed a slight error in our script here. We're actually subtracting our Y degrees. We need to add the Y degrees here, so make sure you make that update. The next thing we're doing is setting up our from rotation, and our from rotation has to be set like this every single frame inside of the update function, because if we did not set it up like this, then we could get a lot of jitter behavior occurring, which is not what we want. And another thing that some people will probably say is that this should go into fixed update, and we may move it to fixed update later if this behavior looks like it's jittering a lot or something like that, so we could move it if we wanted to, but right now we're just going to test it in update to see if it works. The next thing we're doing is setting up our to rotation, so we're just passing in some Euler angles here. So we're passing in 3 floats. We're passing in the X degrees that we're getting above and the Y degrees that we're getting above, and we're not going to rotate in the Z here, because if you think of a cannon doesn't necessarily rotate on the Z axis. You know, a cannon in real life will rotate on the X, which will tilt the cannon back and forth, and on the Y, which will actually sort of spin the cannon for us. But if we were to rotate in the Z, it would just sort of like rotate the cannon in an odd manner, so we don't really want that for this. And finally, we are lerping the Quaternion from our initial rotation for this frame to our desired rotation that we're getting in this frame, and we're multiplying that by time.delta time and our lerp speed just to make sure that this is smoothed out a little bit more, because if you don't do a lerp here and you just continuously update the rotation, then again you're going to run into some jittering behavior. So let's go ahead and actually save this. Let's go back out to our scene, make sure we don't have any errors. Okay, that's fine. And now what we want to do is actually add a tag to our cannon here. So we don't have our cannon tagged as anything yet, so what we're going to do is click on our tags up here, click on add tag, and then we can click on this plus icon and then just enter in the tag that we have in our script, which was cannon with a capital C. And now we can go ahead and save that. So now that we have created our tag, we actually need to add it to this game object. So we can just click on tags up here and click on cannon, and now this game object will be tagged as cannon. And now what we actually want to do is add a component, and the component that we want to add is our cannon controller. And as you can see here, I've got an animator on this object, which I don't really need. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this component. And now we actually need to set up some variables for our speed, friction, and lerp speed. So let's go ahead and test these out a little bit. I'm going to set the speed equal to, let's go with 1, our friction to 1, and our lerp speed to 2. Actually, let's go 1 across the board, because we will be able to update these variables inside of our inspector during gameplay. So now let's actually go to our game, make sure, well, maximize on play is selected, which we don't want, and we do need to move our main camera out of the way. So as you can see now, we can't actually see our cannon, so we want to actually move this back to a position where we can see our cannon and actually easily manipulate it. And I'm just going to be placing it based on my camera preview down here. So actually, one thing we can do to make it really easy to update this is if we make our main camera a child of cannon here, now we can actually zero out the position, which puts it right inside of our cannon's firing tube. I don't think that's the scientific name of it, but that's pretty cool, you know, that it is actually inside of there. That may come in handy a little later. And so now what we can actually do is just move it back in the Z, a little bit up in the Y, and let's actually rotate it a little bit. So let's rotate it on the X. I don't know, like, that looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we've actually got this set up, I'm going to click on my cannon, and as we can see, the position of my cannon is not really in the center. So I'm actually going to go ahead and move it over a little bit. That's pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and move it up a little bit as well. So let's actually put it on 0 for the X. For the Y, we'll go to like 1.5, and the Z looks fine where it is. Now let's actually unchild our main camera here. We can just drag it out, and let's go ahead and click on our cannon, because we have to do one more thing to our cannon to get this script to actually work. So for a raycast to actually hit our cannon, we actually have to have a collider on our cannon. So let's just go ahead and add a physics box collider to our cannon here. So that looks pretty good. And you could make this larger if you wanted to, you know, just so you have more clickable area on your cannon. But for right now, that should do fine, just for testing purposes at this point. So now we're going to go ahead and press play. Okay, so now let's click on our cannon, and as we can see, it is rotating very slowly, which is not exactly what we want, right? So it is sort of moving very slowly now. So let's actually update some of these variables. We're going to update our speed to 5, leave our friction to 1, and change our lerp speed to 3. And now let's see what this does here. Okay, that's a little bit better. It's a little smoother now. One thing I'm noticing is that I don't necessarily like the way the box collider is interacting, because what's going on right now is I can click, drag, and then if I leave the area of the cannon's collider, then basically I cannot drag it anymore. So right now I'm off the collider and I can't drag. So here I'm back on it and I can actually click and drag. So what we're actually going to do is increase the size of our box collider as well once we get our variables the way we want them. So this is moving pretty smoothly right now. So what I actually want to do is increase this a little bit more. So I'm going to change my speed to 8. Let's just see what this does. So again, we can see it's moving very quickly now. That's kind of cool. I like the way that looks. That seems like some pretty good variables. Let's actually update the lerp speed a little bit to see if this helps at all. Okay, yeah, that definitely helps. I like that. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and stop this now and make sure we remember these. So we're going to use a speed of 8, friction of 1, and a lerp speed of 5. So let's go ahead and stop that and set those up. 8, 1, 5. And now let's actually update our box collider, because I don't like the way that if I just sort of get right off the cannon, I can no longer rotate. So to update this box collider size, we can just go down to size right here and increase the size. Now, I know that I need to increase it on the X because I was having the most difficulty when moving from side to side and not necessarily when moving up and down. So let's go ahead and just give us a little extra space on the sides here. So that should be more than enough to actually update the rotation of our cannon. Because the way our camera is looking down at our cannon, we don't necessarily have to increase it in the Y, because again, if we go ahead and look at it, if I click down here, and try to drag up and down, I'm almost always going to be clicking on the cannon unless I go way up here. And if you go way up here, it gets, that's a pretty big tilt to your cannon. So we can just go back down, and we can actually click over here now, and we can rotate our cannon pretty easily. So that's looking really good. I really like the way that's coming together. Pretty cool little controller. Okay, so the next thing that we actually want to do, well, let's go ahead and save this. Be sure to save quite often because you don't want to lose your work. But the next thing that we want to do is set up some initial testing values for our Cannonball. So we're going to actually go back out to our scripts here, and we do have to add one additional function to our cannon controller. And the function we're going to add is a firing function for our cannon. So underneath our void update function, we are going to add a new function that we will just call public void. We're going to call this fire cannon. Okay, and inside of our fire cannon, we actually have to have several variables that we want to call. So we're going to go back up to the top now, and underneath our cannon rotation variables, we're going to create a new comment and say this is going to be our cannon firing variables. Okay, very cool. And now we want to actually set up a couple of variables for this. So the first variable that we are actually going to need is going to be a public game object that we can just call our Cannonball. And this is just going to be a reference for our Cannonball prefab so that when we fire, we are actually instantiating this Cannonball into our scene so that it can do what it needs to do. The next thing we need is a private rigid body reference for our Cannonball RB. So that's just going to be a reference we use to get access to our Cannonball's rigid body. We are going to need a public transform reference for our shot position, and we're going to do a public game object explosion here, and this is going to be a reference for an explosion when we fire the cannon. And we're going to set that up a little bit later because I really want to get the Cannonball created and firing in this video. So let's go ahead and move down a little bit, and inside of our fire cannon we're going to have to do quite a few things. The first thing we want to actually do is update our shot position's rotation to match our cannon's rotation. So if we go back to our scene, our shot position is actually going to be inside or right at the edge of our cannon's tube. And when I rotate my cannon, I want to make sure that my shot position maintains the same rotation as the cannon so that when we fire it, it moves in the direction that the cannon is pointing. So let's go back out to our fire cannon, and we can just very easily say shotPos.rotation is equal to our transform.rotation. Okay, so the next thing we actually want to do is set up a firepower for this cannon, but I forgot to add that variable up here, so let's go ahead and update that. So we're going to create a new variable that we will call a public float firepower, and we will actually come back to this a little bit later, but for right now that's fine. And we're going to go down to our fire cannon method again, and we're just going to say that our firepower times equals let's just say 2000, and I'm increasing it this dramatically so that we can actually get the physics really pushing our Cannonball forward. And now what we actually want to do is instantiate our Cannonball. So we're going to say gameobject Cannonball ball copy is equal to instantiate. We want to pass in our Cannonball here. We're going to pass in our shotPos.position, and we're going to pass in our shotPos.rotation here. Okay, cool. And the last thing we actually want to do is say we're going to instantiate this as a game object. Pretty easy stuff here. Now the next thing we actually want to do is add some force to our Cannonball. So we're going to say Cannonball RB.add force. We're going to add force in our transform.forward direction multiplied by our firepower. And finally, we want to actually instantiate our explosion, and we're going to instantiate that explosion at our shotPos.position and our shotPos.rotation. Okay, cool. So now we actually need to save this. We're going to go back out to our scene. No errors, it doesn't look like. A couple of warnings, but that's okay. And the next thing we actually want to do is set up a shot position on our cannon. So let's go ahead and click on our cannon and do a create empty, and that's going to create an empty child. And for right now, I'm just going to move it right out past our collider, because if it's inside of our collider, we'll run into some issues. So I'm going to move it out a little bit in front of it, and again, we'll fix this a little bit later, but I just want to do it for some testing right now. And let's actually rename this to shot pause as well. And if we click back on our cannon, we can drag the shot pause back onto there. And let's go ahead and set up our explosion as well. So we're going to go to our project, go to standard assets, particle systems, prefabs, and if we click on our cannon, we're just going to drag in the explosion prefab from Unity. Okay, cool. And now let's actually set up our firepower with an initial value of like 0.5. And now the next thing we actually need to do is create our cannonball. So what we're going to do to create our cannonball is we're just going to create it in our scene and then drag it into a folder. So we're going to actually create a game object, a 3D object that's a sphere. Let's zero this out so we can see where it's at. All right, move it up. And let's rename this to our Cannonball. And the first thing we actually want to do here is add a rigid body. So just click Physics, Rigid Body, and we can leave this to the defaults for right now. Again, this is just going to be for testing, but we do want to make it a little bit prettier, right? So we're going to go to our Assets, Materials, and we're going to create a new material for this that we can just call Cannonball. And we're just going to create it sort of like we did our cannon, just a dark cannonball, and we're gonna actually make this fairly flat here, so that looks pretty good. Let's just drag it onto our cannonball here. Okay, cool. Now let's actually go back to our cannon. Well, okay, so the first thing we actually need to do is create a new folder as well. So we're gonna right click, create a folder for our prefabs. Okay, and if we click in here, we can actually drag our cannonball into our prefabs. Very cool. Now if we click on our cannon, we can drag in the cannonball to the cannonball spot on our script, and we should be good to go. But we have to do one more update in our script. So what we actually have to do is go back to our script now, and right now our fire cannon method will never be fired. So what we want to do is add a condition that will actually fire the cannon. So for now, I'm just going to say if get mouse button down, and we're going to actually use a right click this time, then we're going to call our fire cannon. Okay, cool. Now let's go ahead and save that. Let's go back out to our scene. Oops. Oh, input. Forgot input. If input dot get mouse button down, that should do it. Okay, cool. Now let's go ahead and actually delete this cannonball from our scene. We don't need it. And let's just test it to see what happens. So we're going to press play now. And when I right click, we fired. Oh, we've got an issue. It looked like it fired a cannonball though. It did. Interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and check this guy out to see what's happening. It says it's happening on line 55. Oh, of course, we're not getting a reference for our cannonball's rigid body. So we have to do that after instantiating it. So we're instantiating our cannonball, but now we actually have to get the rigid body of that cannonball. So what we're actually going to do now is say that our cannonball RB is equal to cannonball copy.getComponent type of rigid body. Okay, now that should do it. Let's go ahead and save that. Go back out to our scene, clear those errors away, and now let's try it one more time. So now when I right click, boom, that cannon is gone. I mean, like, it is way gone. I didn't even hardly see it move. So let's actually click on our cannon and drop down our firepower now. We're going to drop it down to a value of, let's say, 5,000. All right, and now let's right click. Man, thing is moving fast. Let's actually shoot the wall. Pretty sure it moved pretty far away. So let's actually... Man, where are these things going? Oh. It looked like it flew back on the... Yep, so it's flying back on the collider now. So that's not exactly what we want. So let's change something up really quickly. Let's go back out to our script here. And right now we're going on the shotPause.rotation. Let's change this to be our transform.rotation. And now we actually don't need to update our shotPause rotation here. So we're just sort of hard coding this to be the cannon's rotation. So let's go back to our scene now, press play, and it's going to be really, really high again, but that's okay. We're going to right click. There it goes. Way off in the distance. Okay, so it looks like our shot pause is still a little bit too close to our cannon here, so let's move it out a little bit more. We're gonna move it out way in front this time, and now let's try it out. So now if I go to my cannon, I'm gonna drop down my firepower to like 0.5 and just fire it. There it goes. Where did the cannonball go? Oh, there it goes. Okay, so our firepower may be a little bit much. So let's actually stop this. We're gonna go back out to our scene or our script, and let's just remove this increase here. All right. I was doing that because we wanted to have a ton of force on our cannonball, but it looks like it's gonna be really hard to test that. So let's go back to our level, go to our cannon, and let's actually update the firepower to like 10 here, and let's test it now. Okay, so I'm just gonna shoot one. And as you can see, it went like straight up. Oh, you know what it is? I just figured it out. I can't believe I forgot about this. Okay, guys, so here's what's going on. And I totally forgot about this. But the explosion that we're using from Unity. Okay, so if we look at this explosion here, it is actually using some explosion force. When we're instantiating it, it's creating an explosion force itself, which we don't want. So let's go ahead and actually turn this off. And now let's check it out. Okay, again, I'm just gonna try to shoot this pillar. Boom. Okay, that is way too low. It is literally just dropping at the end of my cannon. Okay, let's up it up a little bit. Let's go 100. So this should definitely work a little bit better. Fly away, you fool. Wow. 1,000. There we go. Kind of went a little farther that time. Still not quite enough to reach our target. Well, that one might actually get there. But that's why we had the drastic increase to our firepower. So now let's actually go back up to our script here, and let's just undo the removal of this firepower update and go ahead and save it. And let's go back into our scene, and now let's test it again. And now we will actually see the cannonballs firing pretty quickly. Actually, let's drop this down from 10. Let's go down to 5. And let's fire one and see how far it goes. So I'm just gonna... Oh, it's way out here. Where'd it go? There it was. There it goes. So we can see it here. And way over there is our initial setup. Okay, so 2,000 may still be pretty high because that's an overpowered cannon. All right, so let's go back to our script here. And one thing I'm not really happy about is hard coding this value. So what we're going to do is go up to our cannon firing variables, and we're going to add a new firing variable here. And we're going to add it as a public, and we're going to add it as an int. And we're just going to call this our power multiplier. And we're just going to initially set this to a value of like 100. And let's go back down to our fire cannon here and replace this 2000 with our power multiplier. Okay, cool. Go ahead and save it, and let's go back out to our scene. And now if we click on our cannon, let's get back down there, press F. Okay, so right now, as you can see, I've got my firepower to a value of 10 and my power multiplier to a value of 100, so that should give us a power of 1,000. So let's see if that will work for us. So we're going to go ahead and press play now. I'm actually going to try and blast one of those guys down at the end. Having a fairly level trajectory should work. So boom, actually it didn't work. Too low. All right. Oh god, I think it's gone. Actually, you know what I just realized? We're increasing our firepower every single time we call fire cannon. Don't want to do that. So I just looked over to our firepower and it's increasing drastically. So what we're going to do is remove this from our fire cannon, and we're going to change this to our start function. So this should help. Sorry about all the issues here, guys, but it is sort of rapid prototyping going on. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out now. So we should end up with a value of 1,000 for our firepower. I'm just going to click play here and up my cannon a little bit and fire. Okay, so that's still not awesome. So let's go ahead and actually, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to play with the firepower till we find something we like here. So right now it's 1,000. We're going to up it to 2,000 here. So double our firepower, and we're going to test this out. Alright, that looks cooler. That looks better. Yeah, that's definitely better. So I definitely like the value of 2,000 a little bit better. So in order to reach that, we actually need to multiply by a value of 200 here, and that should do it. Okay, coders, this video definitely went a little bit longer than I was hoping, but we have created some pretty cool stuff for our game. This game's starting to come along pretty well here, so that's really exciting. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this as well. But again, that's going to do it for this video. We are going to add some target metrics for this game series, or the videos within this game series, which you can check out in the description below. If we meet some of these metrics, then we will release things like the models, the code, and possibly even the complete project. So please be sure to share this video with your friends. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.